Hi there, I'm Vincent Boss and I provide dating and self-improvement advice. And in today's podcast, we're going to be discussing, does my ex check my social media? I provide audio coaching to help people try and get their ex back or get a new girlfriend or boyfriend. Check out my website for more details, www.dateme.tips. Please check your spam and junk folders if you are expecting an email from me. So now let's get back into today's podcast. And today we are discussing, does my ex check my social media? So if you have gone through a breakup, it's very natural to wonder whether or not your ex checks your social media. In today's podcast, I'm going to be giving you 3 points to consider when we ask the question of, does my ex check my social media? So let's get straight into this, and point number 1 is for the dumpers. Now, if you are a dumpee and if you are wondering whether or not your ex checks your social media, please keep listening because I will be getting to your perspective very, very shortly. But first of all, we're going to be speaking from the perspective of a dumper. And if you are a dumper, if you are asking yourself a question, if you are wondering whether or not your ex checks your social media, if you're listening to this podcast, which of course you must be, then therefore you need to be thinking deeper along the lines of why this actually matters to you. You know, you ended the relationship and therefore you wanted to move forward on your own path. And hence, if you are wondering whether or not your ex is checking your social media, there is a strong likelihood that there is still some unfinished business between you, you might say. There is still a strong likelihood that there are conversations to have and potentially, who knows, a reconnection to be made. If you are finding more and more time that you are thinking about your ex, but you are wondering whether or not they're on your social media, whether or not they are thinking about you, then perhaps it is time for you to reach out to your dumpee. I'm a big believer that if somebody enters a relationship and then wants to speak with their ex, they need to be the one to reach out. Okay, so whether or not you know for certain you want to get back together, maybe you're just thinking at this stage, you know what, I would like to speak with my ex again. If you are feeling this way, then I strongly suggest you as a dumper reaches out to your dumpee. This is not a position where you can just sit around and think, hey, I'll wait for my ex-dumpee to reach out to me, because this is not likely to happen. You've got to understand that they are respecting your decision. And if they didn't respect your decision, they would have probably pushed you further away and you would never be asking this question in the first place. So if you are a dumper and you are seriously wondering time and time whether or not your ex is on your social media, whether they are viewing your posts, whether they might interact with something that you put online, then I would say to you, you're thinking about your ex, maybe it's time for you to reach out to them, because you never know, they might want to hear from you again, and if they do, then this could be a great conversation, but you just don't know where it may lead. Obviously, don't add pressure. You know, dumper or dumpee, both of you need to be on the same page for anything to move forward, but there is no harm, dumpers, in reaching out to your ex and seeing if they would like a conversation. The one time I would strongly suggest you don't do this is if you absolutely have zero thought of reconnecting. If you have zero thought, zero mindset, zero idea of taking anything further, then this isn't something you should do. Now, like I said earlier, maybe you're not quite at the stage of knowing for certain what you want to do, and therefore that's fine to reach out. But if you definitely don't want to get back together with your ex, I don't suggest you confuse them or give them false hope. But what I would say is, if you're thinking about them right now, if you're wondering if they're on your social media, then probably you are thinking more about them subconsciously than even consciously you would like to admit. So maybe, dumpers, it's time after this podcast for you to reach out to your ex. So now let's get into point number 2 and the second point of today's podcast about, does my ex check my social media? And point number 2 is for the dumpees. So if you are a dumpee and if you're wondering whether your ex is checking your social media, the first thing I would say to you is you need to be moving forward on your own journey and not let your dumper distract you from your path. Okay, as I've just said in point number 1, if a dumper is serious about having a conversation, or more so, they need to reach out to you, and that is likely what they would do. So if you are a dumpee and you're spending lots and lots of time worrying, wondering, considering, dwelling on the fact of your ex on your social media, this is not good for you. This is not healthy for you. And if your dumper wants to speak with you, if they even want to reconnect, if they just want to reach out and say a few words because they aren't sure how it will go, they will send you a direct message, maybe even a phone call. Very rarely they might actually see you in person. It's much more likely to be a message. But if they're just watching your stories, for instance, if they're interacting with your posts with a like, maybe an emoji, that is not enough at this time. They need to be giving you direct contact. If they're going to be typing on your social media, it needs to at least be a question of sorts for you to start interacting. So whether or not they are watching your social media, checking what you post, etc., this ultimately makes no difference unless they take that step to reach out. But whether or not they are checking your social media, this is where you need to consider a few potential options. Firstly, if you are somebody who are posting stories, then if you post a story and if your ex checks your social media, you will see that they have watched your story. You know, stories on all of the platforms that I'm aware of at this time at least do tell you who viewed your story. Now, maybe this will change in the future. Maybe there are ways to avoid this, but by and large, if you post a story, you will know if your ex has viewed it. And what I would say is you can use this to your advantage to showcase personal development and personal growth. I don't suggest you lie. I don't suggest you put false things on your stories, because this isn't something you can live up to. But what you can do is show your growth. If you are somebody who's gone through self-improvement, showcase that in a story. And if your ex views your social media, this will give them every opportunity to notice that growth and to maybe start regrowing romantic emotional attraction for you. So use stories to your advantage. You will see, most likely, if your ex has viewed your story. But if they do and then they stop, or if they haven't so far, please don't get hung up on this. Like I said, you've got to concentrate on your own journey, your own path. You can't get hung up on whether your ex is viewing your stories or not. But what about if you post something online and you have no way of knowing officially if they have viewed it? Even if they have, they might not interact. You would never know for certain. So what I would say on this is, again, post positive, truthful, showcasing your improvement posts. If you do this, you stand every opportunity of, even if your ex doesn't see your social media, friends of friends, family members who know other people, this can get back to your ex. I would always say that even if your ex doesn't follow you on social media, even if they don't seek out your social media, if you use social media to your advantage, it will likely in some way get back to them. There is an uncanny ability, it sometimes seems, of dumpers finding out about their dumpees and the improvements, or unfortunately the lack of, that they have gone through. So if you are a dumper, you will likely find out about your ex. If you are a dumpee, you need to think that your ex will probably find out about your life if you're posting it online. So make sure if you do post something online, it is positive. It's not negative. It's not sad song lyrics. It's not poor me posts. Be positive, live life to the full, showcase self-improvement. Whether or not your ex checks your social media, if you live in your life in the right way, it might just get back to them through a third party. And if you showcase improvements, you could reattract your ex. It's certainly possible. But what I would say for dumpees, most important thing right now is don't get hung up on this. Don't keep checking online to see if your ex has viewed your story, for instance. You can't do this. This is unhealthy. If you keep checking to see if your ex is interacting, looking, viewing your social media, your internet usage, what you will see instead is a decline in your own mental health. If you keep doing this, if you keep checking, looking, worrying, this is going to degrade your mental well-being, and that is not going to be helpful for you. At the end of the day, checking your ex's social media, checking if your ex is viewing your social media is not going to help you. At best, it's probably going to confuse you, and at worst, it could break your heart again. So focus on you, your improvements, and living your life to the full. So now let's get into point number 3 and the final point of today's podcast about does my ex check my social media? And point number 3 is there is no way of knowing for certain. So like I just suggested and hinted at in the previous points, there is no way of knowing for certain whether an ex has checked your social media. What we have to consider is that even if you see that your ex viewed your story, this perhaps could have been an accident. This could perhaps be a situation that they're scrolling through, they clicked something they didn't even mean to, and maybe they clicked off straight away. This instance would suggest that you would think they're viewing your social media, but in reality, they haven't been. Or maybe it looked like they did, and then the next time you post, they don't, and you worry about it. This is why I said you can't get hung up on things, because we don't know for certain. Even if it says they have looked at your social media, even if you've had an interaction, maybe you've had a like on a post, again, you don't know for certain if they're just not scrolling through and have accidentally clicked the like. Now let's flip this round. Maybe you have no official indication they're checking your social media, but what you don't realise is that they are viewing your social media from a friend of a friend's account. Maybe there is a third party who is viewing your stories with your ex in their presence. You would have no way of knowing for certain that your ex is viewing your social media. It doesn't look like they are, but perhaps they have been through a third party. Maybe they're even using a fake account. Now, that is not something I would ever suggest doing, but unfortunately, it does take place sometimes. So basically, the point of point number 3 is to say we don't know for certain. Even if it says they are viewing your social media, maybe they aren't. Even if it says they aren't viewing your social media, maybe they are. And therefore, connected with point number 2 is you've got to focus on you. Live your life in the right way, post positive posts, but don't get hung up on who has seen what, because you just don't know what the reality is. If you live your life in the right way, if you become a better person today than you were yesterday, a better person tomorrow than you are currently today, then you will grow your attraction net. And if you don't get your ex back, you will attract somebody and find somebody even better. With or without your ex, you will have a positive future. So ultimately, it doesn't matter if your ex is checking your social media or not. It doesn't matter whether or not they see your post or your story, because you can and will find happiness again. If you post positive things, they will most likely drift back to your ex one way or the other. But even if they don't, it doesn't matter. Your happiness is not connected to your ex. Your ex does not rule your life. You are the captain of your ship, and you will live your life your way in happiness and fulfillment. But you can only do this if you focus on what you are doing and not what your ex is doing. So as I said at the start of today's podcast, if you're a dumper and you're thinking of your dumpee more and more, wondering whether they're looking at your social media, reach out to them. Okay, because you are clearly thinking more of them than perhaps you even realise, and it could be time to have that conversation. Unless you're absolutely adamant you would never consider reconnecting. If that's the case, if you genuinely, truly would never ever think about this right now, I would say don't reach out, it's not fair. But ultimately, if you're wondering about them, I think you're thinking about them a little bit more than maybe you want to admit. If you're a dumpee, don't live your life by who views your social media. Ultimately, we don't know who does, we don't know who doesn't. Just do things for you and everything will fall into place. If you believe that this podcast has helped you, then please consider buying me a coffee. The link to do so is in the description.